How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of our Lumix live streaming sessions that we've got. For this week, I want to bring up again, for everyone that's over on the YouTube platform, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras with any questions that you guys have for myself or Brandon. And we will do our best to get to them. As you guys may have noticed for the title of this week's event, this is about portrait photography. So we'll try to get to some of the questions that you guys have about video features and things like that, but we're primarily focused on the photography content and checking out some of the work of Brandon as well. For everybody over in the Photo Plus platform, welcome. Thank you for coming. If you guys have questions in the Photo Plus platform, for either Brandon or myself, make sure to drop them in the chat there. We are monitoring. We have some people watching the questions there. I have them up here so I can see them, and we will happily try to get to as many of them as we can. If you are new to this platform, again, back over to the YouTube folks, if you are new to this platform, make sure to hit like and subscribe on these videos. It helps us tremendously in bringing this content to you guys every single week. We have a couple of more sessions this month, which are going to be held on the Tuesdays. So if we take a look here, we've got Michael Richardson next week from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday to talk about sports photography and his experiences there. And then the last session for the month is with Jack Salamanchuk, and we're going to be covering macro photography, light painting, light composition, or live composition, with a lot of the new cameras that we have coming out. So make sure to, again, if you're over on the YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get the notifications for that. And while you're at it, make sure to head over to the Photo Plus platform, get registered. It's free so that you can be taking part in everything going on over there. There are continuous conversations happening every single day. We have our live chat open basically 24 hours a day. And you can schedule meetings with myself, Brandon, Michael, or Jack to have one-on-one conversations specifically about questions that you guys might have. So with that out of the way, I'm going to jump over here and bring Brandon into the conversation. So let's see here. Hey, Brandon, how's it going?
Hey, Sean, how you doing?
Oh, can't complain, can't complain. It's a lovely day.
It is a lovely day today.
So, for those on all these platforms, can you give everyone a bit of a background, who you are, what you do for the company, and what kind of, obviously, portrait photography we're talking about today, but anything else you want to throw out there about yourself?
Sure. My name is Brandon Cortez. I am a portrait photographer based here in the lovely Jersey Shore, and I've worked with Panasonic Lumix, since before the G series started. So back in the point and shoot days with the battery operated ones that we had. So G1 all the way up until now. So a long time with Panasonic, and a long time being a professional photographer doing portraits and various other concepts that I guess we'll take a look at some of the images I'd like to do, but by no means I guess I'm a typical portrait photographer where you get that a normal just stand and pose and smile and make a face. I tend to do a little more artsy things and manipulate light in my work, especially.
Cool. Well, yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about, because your style is definitely, out of the norm that I'd say a lot of people have expected seeing from, at least from Panasonic and the Lumix brand. But there's a lot that you do going into the process, which I want to cover a little bit later, but could you give us kind of a rundown of like what your go-to equipment is when you're going out for a shoot?
Yeah, so being with Panasonic, we get to have all the nice toys, but I do actually buy all the stuff myself, and I don't use any of the Panasonic gear. If anyone from headquarters is watching, there's no liability if I break something. It's all my own. So gear that I use two cameras. I always carry two camera bodies with me, just in case I always have a backup. And my number one camera is always going to be the S1R. I love the resolution on it. I love the fact that it has such a sensor that even if I over or underexpose something, I have that leeway to bring something up or down if I need to in post. The sensor on the camera is the best camera sensor that I've ever used. That's under if I'm using controlled lighting situations, which is 99% of the time. I'm mostly a studio photographer, or I'm going to be using large flashes that can overpower the sun. So the S1R is my number one go-to. If I'm going to be using situations where it's going to be difficult to light something, or I can't use large light modifiers, then I'm going to be using the S1 or the S5 now that we have access to the S5 to use, especially in the RAW files. So the S1 or the S5, I actually prefer the S1 handling just because I'm used to the larger body and the button placement with the S1R versus the S5. In terms of gear, it's going to be a multitude of different lenses that we have. But my number one lens, which is pretty much on my camera almost entirely, is the 24 to 72/8. That lens is phenomenal. So that lens is always keep it nearby. The lens is right here. Then lately, I've been using the this 85 that we have. This lens is so phenomenal, and we're going to show some images taken with that too. But the 85 is a fantastic lens as well, especially for if you're doing portrait photography. But that's the only prime besides the 51.4 that I will use. The 50, I used to use that before the 85, but I kind of pulled away from that now to the 85. I like the compression a little bit better on the 85. But aside from that, I do use the 135 Sigma, and I do use a ton for fashion work, the 70 to 200 2.8. So those are the main lenses that I use in addition to the S1 and the S1R.
Awesome. Now you had mentioned with strobes in general. So when it comes to strobe work, obviously for a lot of people that are joining us in these platforms, they're always kind of a toss up. Do you use on camera flash? Do you use those remotely, or do you use things like some of the Pro Photo Studio lights in your style of shooting? Do you have a preference in which type you like to use over others?
Yeah, so if at all possible, I always want to use off-camera flash. I don't like having the flash right on the top of the camera. If I'm doing event photography, then sure, just because I don't really want to set up lights all over the area and flashing in people's faces. So the practicality of it is not possible. So on-camera flash is what I would use for that. And 90% of the time, it's going to be the V1 from Godox. That's the one I'll be using the most for that. Aside from that, everything is going to be using Godox systems. Now, I have used the Pro Photo systems, and I've liked the Pro Photo systems a lot. It's just usually either the size or the cost that's the determining factor, because I like to use a lot of lights. So I can either be, less than $2,000 invested and have a number of different lights for Godox, or I can be, tens of thousands of dollars and have what I need for everything else. It's just Pro Photo's very expensive in terms of the things, but it does not mean to say they don't make phenomenal product, because they absolutely do. But the Godox for me has been just as color accurate in terms of the workflow that I use as the Pro Photo stuff that I've used. So that seems to be the way that I've always done it. It's always off-camera flash, and I'm very well invested in the Godox system.
Cool. Yeah, and it looks like hopefully Albert over on YouTube, hopefully that answers your question for the types of strobes that Brandon's using. Before we move a couple more steps forward, there were a couple questions in here that actually I want to address before we go too far out, because once we start talking about your images, these may pop back up. One of the first questions came from Ruckus. Was asking about when you're taking raw photos of the S5, does the color profile, i.e. Cine D, natural, get burned into the photo? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because obviously, for you and I, Brandon, we work with these things all the time, so we're used to how these systems work. But for those that aren't, if you're shooting raw stills, so capturing raw data, the color profiles are not burned into the image. If you're using something like Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, you can tell the program to now pull what the camera was set up as. For the most part, a lot of the cinema-focused color profiles don't translate over into Lightroom or ACR yet. But you can have them, kind of apply on top of what the raw image is. You really only run into that when it's the JPEG image only. And so that raises one of the questions I have for you, Brandon, was, so when you're working, I assume you're working in a raw workflow, but what kind of considerations go into the file types you work with for your clients?
So I haven't shot a JPEG since we had to with the S5. Everything's only been raw images, and it takes up a tremendous amount of space. I'm terabytes deep in Adobe Cloud right now, so they got me on that one. But yeah, no, I've only used raw. My workflow is extremely simplistic. Um, I don't even set custom buttons on my cameras. I use the camera's stock, and I'm only adjusting, the exposure triangle. That's really all I'm ever adjusting on a camera. And truth be told, my camera hasn't risen above the S1R hasn't risen above ISO 100 or 200, ever. Because I'm always lighting something with it. I'm controlling the light. The S1 has gone like to 12,800 and stuff like that. That I go to town with, but I don't use any picture profiles. I do all the color mastering, everything myself. All the color grading is all done by me. I don't have any presets that I use for Adobe Lightroom or anything like that. It's strictly, day one, whatever it came out with, that's what I'm using, and I'm adjusting it based on that. Just because I feel if I get into presets, then I'm only limited to what that preset can give me, and then I can tweak it from there. If I arrive at something and it looks like the preset, at least I made it. I'm not influenced by someone else's work or what they thought a color should have looked like. That's just my mentality. And I think most of my work, you'll see that I try to be as original as possible. That's why some of the concepts, if someone looks at my Instagram page for once, it doesn't really look like anyone else's Instagram page. Like, it's like, oh, he does horror, he does fashion, he does bikini. It's kind of all over the place. And that's kind of where my mind is usually at as an artist, where I'm trying to create as much stuff as I can, to be a little variety.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue. So actually, I want to jump over and have some of the images that you've sent over. So I'm going to let these roll kind of while we talk about it, and then we'll pick a couple of them to stop at, because I think that's one of the cool things that actually drew me to a lot of the work that you do, is that you have a really wide breadth of topics that you photograph. From those more traditional, headshots, the kind of environmental portraits, all the way into those, kind of really hyper stylized, type imagery. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, myself included, since I'm not really a portrait photographer. I don't have the personality, I think, to direct a model or direct another person to do something creative.
Sure.
But it shows a really solid understanding of lighting and a solid understanding of a vision that you're trying to get across. So when we look at, and I'm waiting for this image to kind of loop back around so I can stop it, because there's a couple images that you have that are I assume the circus theme in them, and I actually want to pause it. I think it's coming up next. And kind of go through the process of what you did to get up into that shot. I think I got it here. It's the image with the kind of circus background and the split holding herself up. Could you walk us through the process of how you came up with this image and how it all worked?
Yeah, so that's a model whose name is Cara, and it's her birthday today. So happy birthday to Cara, who's watching. So just so I can get that out there to her. And so a lot of my imagery is really from, I guess, movies. And I study a lot, not so much the movie itself, but a lot of the movie posters and things that I see. I look at fashion magazines, but I don't look at any current fashion magazines. I go back to like the 90s. I go back to like the 80s and get inspired by artists and imagery that I see there. And this one in particular, I was like, circuses have always, interested me, but what if it's kind of like a darkish, kind of grungy looking circus idea, and you have these like performers who are like, looking a little, more like doll-like in the imagery, and that's kind of where I got that idea from, of having like this kind of dark circus theme, and that's really where this image kind of came to fruition. I was lucky to work with really talented makeup artists and the costume designers, and we created this whole set of this whole circus imagery. And she happened to be an amazing contortionist and does yoga. So she was able to hold that pose for like 2 or 3 minutes straight, which is pretty incredible.
That definitely is. So with this image in particular, could you walk us through some of the like how you lit this image?
Yeah.
Because it's definitely got that really cool dynamic style lighting, and I
Sure.
think a lot of people want to try to mimic this style as well.
So this entire image, I can tell you everything that I shot it with. This was with the 24 to 72.8. This is with the S1R. I'm looking at the image right here in the corner. And this was with a beauty dish and a V flat. So this is with the beauty dish, and the light position is going to be in the butterfly light because it's going to give those really carved out cheekbones, which is what you'll typically get with using a butterfly light position. You're shooting that top down kind of angle, and it gives a nice contrasty look to everything, which is what you're going to get from the beauty dish. So anytime that you have a lot of makeup or a very talented makeup artist like I was working with, which is Heather, you have the ability to draw out that detail and specular highlights with a beauty dish, and that's really why I chose that light modifier. But my big thing is always a beauty dish can give contrasty light, so you don't want. I hate shadows that are jet black. I think those stand out on images, especially if you see them. So I always fill my shadows with something, and I was using V flat for that.
Cool, cool. Now the background choice there too, is that a practical background, or is that something added in post?
No, that is so. I don't do any kind of post work as minimal as possible. I would do skin retouching, but if I can light it, that's really the purpose. See, I've always learned that the purpose of lighting is to fix something. It's not just to illuminate something. It's the lighting. The lighting is doing all the work mostly for me, so I can take away little skin blemishes and things like that in post. But the majority of the work is the lighting. So that background is a background that I got off of Amazon for about $15-16. Kid circus background. That's all that is. But because of the contrasty light that you're getting from the beauty dish and the way you're lighting it, and you get that natural fall off by bringing it in closer, you get those shadows, and it almost gives it that dimensionality. So it's just light tricks. That's all it is.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, like, I mean, personally for myself, I've never been able to really, kind of master any of that kind of light control.
Sure.
I basically always stick to landscape and street photography because that's where I'm most comfortable. So there's definitely a lot for those that aren't used to shooting like this to see what can be done. And honestly, not to make it sound easier than it is, but once you spend the time and learn and practice and see how light falls, it shows that it does become kind of second nature. Like a lot with a lot of your styles. Like I want to go to the next one that's in the same kind of genre. This image here with, I cannot remember the name of the model that was here, but kind of that similar thing. Using the background, getting a similar kind of story with that set of images that you have, but this one has a very different feel. So could you go into a little bit of details to how you captured this one?
Yeah, so I knew the pose. This is Alexandria, so I wanted it to be a very dynamic look because she has the very clear, again, cheekbones, great definition on her, and amazing at posing. So having her as the ringmaster just seemed like be the most thing. And the lighting itself, it's a nice subtle fall off to the cheek, and it's still not black. It's all filled in with the V flat on that side. And this is, again, still the same lighting. This is a single beauty dish. I didn't even need a fill just because the light was there. And pulling the light back will give you a harder light. And I wanted it to have that look of using like a stage light that you would see from a circus where they have those big giant spotlights on them. So that's where I did that. And in this particular image, which actually a lot of my images, I don't even use Photoshop nowadays because the mobile processing has gotten so good. So this was 100% edited on an iPad using
wow.
So yeah, I mean, Photoshop is available now for the iPad, but when I had shot this was before those. So yeah, this is it's a punchy image. It has that vibrant color, and that's just capturing a lot of the stuff that was already there and using contrast. Black and white, playing with black and white is the biggest thing. And I think that's the biggest thing for lighting for me is, if I give more brightness on certain areas, it makes the other areas appear darker, and if I just fill it out, it gives more dimension to everything.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions in the chat about how you're approaching some of this stuff. One of the first questions was again from Ruckus, was asking, so in your editing process, what kind of monitor are you using? What kind of platform do you use for the editing? And I think you partially answered that, but
Yeah, so everything that I edit is what I'm talking to you right now, which is a 27-inch 5K iMac, and that's the only monitor that I use. I know there, you can use calibrated monitors and things like that, and I do think that those are what your typical photographer would always use. They'd always have things blocking out the monitor and things like that, but the final thing that most of my clients are going to be looking at is not going to be something that's calibrated. It's going to be on an iPad or it's going to be on an iPhone. So if I work within those parameters and I get the color to look how I want it to within that color scheme, I think then that's what they see also, as opposed to, I get the red looking like this and then on the monitor it changes, on their phone it changes. So that's my mentality. However, I do think it is worthwhile to calibrate monitors and things like that. It's just, I try to keep things as basic as possible. Otherwise, I'll use an iPad Pro, which has, but they all have tremendous colors on a lot of the Apple products, or I'll use a MacBook. But my workflow is always Lightroom and Photoshop for most things. But most things are edited in Lightroom in terms of the coloring, and then Photoshop is only just for retouching and things like that.
Cool. And then we have another question here for you, which is when you're shooting, which mode do you typically have your cameras in? Like, do you use manual, aperture, shutter? Like, how do you go about that process?
So everything is always 100% manual for the flash and for the camera itself. Every now and then, if it's a situation of light that I can't eyeball it, which nowadays, because I've been using flash for so long, I can look at something like 1/32 power, like 1/16, stuff like that. But before, what I used to do, and I would always recommend this for someone who's just learning flash or wants to get into it, put it in TTL, take an image, see what the camera did or what the flash did in terms of its metering, and then tailor it to your taste after there, because that at least gives you a good starting point. But I'm always shooting in manual mode. I'm always at the flash sync of the camera, and I'm always at the lowest ISO, and I'm always on face detection autofocus because that works phenomenal on our cameras.
Yeah, that was actually the next follow up was going to be about which focus modes do you use?
Some people use this. Some people in portraits always use the single point. I like the single point sometimes, but I've always thought our face detection is just so easy to use, and it nails it right, every time, and it hasn't failed me since. So that's been my go-to, is the face detection.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely second that thought, because even though, like we were saying before, I'm not a portrait photographer, but even in like street photography, our single point AF and the face detection is quick enough to be able to lock onto those faces while you're walking and stuff like that. So in a more controlled environment, I mean, it is just even more spot on. So
exactly, yeah. The models aren't moving between, it's the flash, then they move to the next pose, then they flash. That's always been my workflow, or I'm instructing them, we take a second, compose it, and then I'm moving back, and then I just dial in the flash and the exposure right from there to the autofocus. So
yeah. So I want to move on to maybe a less stylized image here.
Sure.
This is one of the images that we actually showed last week, which was with the 85 millimeter, I believe.
Yes.
So could you walk us through this? Because this is clearly, at least from looking at a ton of images, you can tell that this is not just natural light for the most part.
For all of it, this was the cloudiest, worst day in the shadiest area of the park. Everything there is completely created by flash. It's a 2 light setup right here. So this is the 85 and this is the S1R. So the light positions, there's 2 lights. One is going to be a bare bulb, which is going to be the hair light that is coming from the left-hand side of the bridge. And that's what's giving it that golden color. But I'm also using a gel on that to warm it and giving it that warm tone as if it would be sunlight. And then the next one is going to be the key light, which is going to be right in front, which is an octobox. And that's what's lighting her face and her body up until there. But yeah, that's everything there is all artificial light. It is very, very cloudy day on that day.
Yeah.
So that's 100% in the face detection. I typically don't shoot wide open like this. So this is, at wide open at 1.8 for this lens. I'm someone who I always thought like, bokeh and depth of field, while it's so pretty to look at, I think like it's overused. It's like it's too and the rest of the images that you'll probably see, there's barely any depth of field. Almost everything's in some level of focus.
Yeah.
So, just because my lens can do 1.8, I'm at like, 3.5 or f4. F4 to me looks pleasant, so I think it's you see too much of a, and it's his opinion, it's too much maybe of a crutch for some photographers just to shoot so wide open, but I never want to see, eyelashes in focus and the eye is out of focus. I want to zoom in and see everything in focus. That's why I'm not shooting, usually as wide open as this. But this was like that punchy, impactful image that really gets over our 85 millimeter, because that thing is, again, super sharp.
Yeah, and I honestly, with any new piece of equipment, I think all of us, whether you're on this side of the industry, just like you said, where we have access to pretty much anything that we sell. Yeah. Or if you're someone who's gone out there and you've saved up and you've picked up that lens you've been looking at, there's always those periods where it's like, I'm gonna shoot this thing wide open and I'm just gonna make everything in this style. It's cool.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a shot that we'll show here that's with that 135 Sigma, and that thing is a monster in terms of the depth of field that it creates, and it's just super shallow, and it almost looks sort of distracting, especially in the image. But the image is beautiful, but it's almost sort of like it's competing for the attention of the model, and that's the one thing I don't want it to do.
Yeah, and that's something that definitely comes with experience as you start to photograph more and more, specifically portraiture, understanding that balance of, is bokeh just being used to obliterate a messy background, or are you using it as part of your image? And I think this shot, I think, exemplifies that, finding a way to use it as part of your image, because it forces you to look really close right at her face, the lighting, the way the light falls off on her hair, on her cheeks. It plays incredibly well into that image. And that actually, I think, leads into one of the questions we've got over from Photo Plus, which I apologize, I can't read the names because of the way I have the screen sized so I can see everything. But the question was, for you, Brandon, are you inspired to convey the same message when you create all your portraits? For example, do you want to convey the naturalness of a subject, or their authenticity, happiness, mystery? Is that something that conveys through your general style?
Yeah. So typically it'll be a lot of the concept that I will work on, but if I become friendly enough with the model that I'm working with, and I can usually speak to them for a while beforehand, I try to integrate something about their life, something that they might be passionate about, because I feel that people who are doing something that they care about or know a little bit more about are going to be more interested in what they're doing. It's like for instance, I did a shoot not long ago at a theater with someone who plays bass, and I could have and I used a painted backdrop, and I could have shot that wherever, but this was the first time that they were in a theater since COVID, so that was the big thing. It meant a lot to them to be on stage again. So, she's headbanging and having so much fun playing her bass to an empty crowd, but we're getting the shots that we want. And I don't think I couldn't have gotten that emotion out of her if she had just been in a studio, so that's the big thing. I think the interest of the person and absolutely plays a lot into what I photograph. Cool.
So let's see. I want to continue the slideshow going on here. Sure. And these are all on a loop, so we'll cycle back. But just want to address a couple of the questions out there over on YouTube right now from Ruckus. The image we were just looking at was with the 85 millimeter, and we'll stop and show a couple more of them throughout this session. But I want to use this opportunity really quickly before we go too far again. And remind everybody that if you have questions for Brandon or myself, make sure to drop them in the chats, depending on which platform you're in. If you're over on YouTube, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras. If you're over on Photo Plus platform, make sure to just drop that question right in the chat, and we'll try to address them as best we can. So when we look at, because now it's coming back around, this is one of the images I wanted to stop at here. Another one of those stylized images, the Sweeney Todd type look here. Um,
So
could
that's
you?
one of the
Yeah.
few images that is 100% natural light with just a V flat. That's all that that is, which is incredible.
Yeah, and so could you walk us through some of that what went through with like finding the right position for the model for the vision you had, because
Sure.
there's a lot of people that struggle with natural lighting but actually having it look deliberate, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So this was inside of an attic in Newark where we shot this. Where actually this is at her where she lives in her apartment, and this was the only available light that we had in the entire space that was a natural light, and it was a hazy day, and that kind of whole feel. If you look at the Sweeney Todd movies themselves, or if you look at any of the imagery that comes from the old plays and things like that, everything kind of has that like blown out highlight type of look and that pale kind of skin look. And I think we were shining the knife in between takes, and I saw how the light was hitting on her face by the window. I was like, we're definitely using the window, and that's where we're gonna go right now. So this was the S1 with the 24 to 70 lens that we used for this one, just because I knew I was going to have to bump the ISO up in order to get any kind of detail in the clothing there. I knew that the S1 could handle it in terms of the noise. It kept it very low, and that's the image that we got there. It was a very kind of punchy, dynamic looking image, and it turned out really, really nice. I'm really proud of that set. And again,
Yeah.
this was completely inspired by me literally watching Sweeney Todd and being like a theater nerd. So
Well, there's definitely, I would say, a very successful homage to Sweeney Todd
right.
and that look there. So there's there's so much about, obviously, like what you mentioned before, and actually this image I want to get to in a second too.
Sure.
For those getting into it, looking at a lot of the images that we've looked at so far, there's a big balance between these planned out shoots that have kind of a cohesive direction that you're trying to get across, or a cohesive idea that you're trying to get across.
Yeah.
And then you also have, some of these other photographs, like the one that's up on screen, where it may not be that same kind of stylized approach, in the sense that it's based off, like what you mentioned before, like a movie poster, or having influence there. Could you walk us through some of the process that you go through in coming up with the look and the style of some of your images?
Yeah. It almost always starts with an idea of looking at something that I might have seen or been interested in recently, and then I take it to a sketch where I actually will draw out the poses and things that I see how I want the image to start looking. I will then, after I take that information, start collaborating with the person I'm going to be working with, and then I tell them my ideas. Is this even possible? Like the things that we want to do. I knew we wanted to have a really stormy day, like for instance that image, with a massive dress that was like going to be like 6 or 7 feet long. A huge dress, and the dress just happened to fill it with massive amounts of water at the end of the day too, which is crazy. But yeah, it starts out with the concept. Then I usually draw it out myself. Then I'll send it to my makeup artist or the person who's creating the costume for me if it's going to require that, or even the model first if they even feel comfortable doing the concept. And then it goes to there. I usually scout the location beforehand, so I see how if it fits my vision of the layout, and then we just work on date, time, location, and that's how it usually comes to be. But it almost always starts out with just a drawing because I want to capture how I see it. If I can just simply emulate the drawing that I've done, that's how it usually goes.
Cool, cool. So I just jump back to throw these images up, because I do want to go back to that image that you just described. Looking at finding locations, stuff like this, with that, the waves coming in, the big long dress. Obviously, like you said, the planning goes into it, but when you're actually on site, actually going to capture this shot, what kind of process do you go through when you're on site to create an image like this?
It's difficult because you have to have plan A, you have to have plan B. So plan A for this shoot was going to be shooting on the beach with her standing on the rocks, and I would be lighting her with a softbox. That's the way it was, but it had been way too stormy, and I happened to get there at high tide, so the softbox could not go anywhere near the water without it just spinning around, no matter if someone was holding it or not. And we had someone holding the softbox; it still didn't matter. So my plan B was, how do I get the storm clouds that are coming in and still protect my gear, still protect the model, and everyone can work from a safe distance. So this was, I believe, the 24 to 70, and this is with a 8-stop ND filter. So that was my plan B. I knew I could still capture, the clouds and bring it up in post if I needed to, with an ND filter. So that was my. You have to be able to adapt constantly, because you get there one day and next thing you know, something that was a prop that you're going to use, let's say if it's like a big log or something, that's been taken out by the people, or someone's there already shooting. So you have to always plan, have a B plan for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you actually answered one of the questions that just came up, was actually about how do you balance this particular exposure, because
Sure. Yeah, this was the S1R again, and then I switched to the S1, and then I actually took photos with either one of them, but I think this was the S1R that I ended up arriving at, and then with the ND filter on it was how I got this one, and I had to bump up the ISO in order, just because the light was going all over the place.
Yeah. So for an image like this, the actual balancing of the final image, was that done in camera as far as you can, or was it like put into Photoshop, Lightroom, and worked with levels and stuff like that to balance it?
So the clouds themselves are what I'm always trying to make sure I get the highlight detail or any kind of shadow detail. So I'm exposing only for the background on this one, because I know that the camera is going to be able to pull up in post the person who is. So I'm finding that balance between the two, but again, I don't like to process things really much at all. So there's a little bit of sharpening on the eye just because it was a little noisy, but and a little bit of muting of the color tone. But that's really all the processing that was done for an image like this, just because it didn't really need it, because it had such a punchy kind of quality to it with the ND filter.
Yeah. Well, cool. So we have a question from Roger over on YouTube's asking, Brandon, if you could use one focal length and one flash and modifier for studio portraits, what would you use, and how would you most often position the light? Man, is that a loaded question.
All right, so if I only can use one focal length, I guess we can just pick a lens. The 24 to 70 does everything. I can get close, I can get far. But I mean, I'll just pick. I use 50 millimeter because Nifty 50 does everything. So I'll play by the rules. 50 millimeter would be the focal length that I would pick. What was the next part in terms of the lighting that I would pick? It's got to be something big. So I would use So most people would say an octobox. I like umbrellas, because umbrellas give like huge light, and it's a massive light source, so it's really soft skin. So I would use a 7-foot umbrella, white, not silver, and I would have one-stop diffusion on it, and I would be using the light position. See, loop is fun. Probably Rembrandt, just because I'm gonna be dramatic with it. If I can do anything, turn a light position. That's a really good thing. The number one thing that helped me with terms of lighting is paintings. If you're looking at old paintings, man, that's lighting. That is a person seeing something and painting what is there. There's no flashes or anything like that. It's all just window light.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of those things that did stick with me through college on all of this stuff, was like having to stare and understand why different lighting positions were named what they are.
Yes.
And then actually like having to go look and realize that people actually painted these things. Now we can very easily just with technology recreate it easily.
Yeah. Your 5 normal lighting positions are going to be your main go-tos. Those are the ones that I always swear by. I'm always, in most of my photos, I'm trying to show at least one of them, or maybe 2 of them. If it's a series of photos. So you'll see that on my page too.
Yeah. So there is a question here from Ruckus again, which is asking, for a beginner photographer in this subscription-based software world we live in now, any free software or recommendations that you have for editing, whether you're on a Mac or a PC?
Let's see. I mean, Snapseed tends to be the one that does the most pleasant. It gives you the most wide array of tools that you can use. That's something that's free that I personally used. I've used like all the software, like in the Apple stuff. It's all right. You know, it's not that great. But Snapseed seems to be the one that's the better of the ones that I've seen that's free, and it works really well on iOS or Android for platforms. For computer stuff, I don't know, man. These Adobe guys got us, man. I've seen everything's so good now, you know, that they're offering that I haven't seen one that I've used that I've been super happy with. That's, you know, the mobile platforms are so good, you know. I can't say that something like Snapseed isn't really good for being free, because it is.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of like that same, you know, kind of struggle that I'm in, because I'd say I'm kind of like the opposite of your style. I love
Hmm.
going in and, you know, playing around with a photo and really pushing it and, you know, kind of altering it that way.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, I mean, to echo your point, like Adobe kind of has it. There's a reason why it's been the standard for, oh, God, how long,
Yeah.
that Adobe has been there. And I know there's a lot of people that are frustrated with the subscription based, you know, kind of platform for it. And, you know, truth be told, yeah, I can see why people would be frustrated, because it's either like, I think their base model's what, like $20 a month or $10 a month if you're a student or something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
And that gets you Lightroom, Photoshop, Adobe Bridge, and that's like the core of what any of us really would need, because none of
Yeah.
us really need, unless you're doing stuff that like you and I do for the company outside of it, none of us really need the entire suite of Adobe products.
Sure.
But,
Sure.
you know, going out and trying some of those other free softwares like Raw Therapy and some of those others, I've just never found one that did a good enough job, that like you didn't have to
Yeah.
pull your hair out to make it do even just the simple things. Like, I want to pull my highlights back. Most of
Yeah.
these programs, it's you have to either learn how to use curves to do that. You know, you're
Sure.
having to learn. I forget what the other one was, but well, this is one of those, using like Silky Pix. Silky Pix is fine for just converting very early raw files when you don't have
Sure.
support in something like Lightroom. But to actually go in there and do an edit to them, it's really, really challenging. You almost have to be an engineer to figure some of
Yeah.
this stuff out.
And I think that's the issue, is that some of them are good, but you know, the interface on Snapseed is so much easier. You know, I can figure out where the engineers were going with something like that. On some of these other ones, I'm looking at them, I'm like, you know, it's not. I'm not having fun editing the photo this way. You know, I don't want to edit it like, you know, like I'm not really into it. You know, I want to have fun while I'm doing it. So that's the big
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the advice for Ruckus, I mean, there are a bunch out there. I think one of the best recommendations that anybody can give you, and I mean, this is my recommendation. I'm sure Brandon, maybe your recommendation is different, is to just try them. Find the one that works for your style.
Yeah, the interface is going to be the big thing. If you know how to navigate something like that, like Photoshop you know, was extremely difficult to me when I first got it, and that was years back. But now that I use it now, I'm like, you know, I'm in and out of it. Even Silky Pix is not that bad when you get to it.
Yeah.
But I still prefer the Adobe software, unfortunately. You got to pay. And speaking of which, in terms of the workflow, I only use the Adobe Cloud. I don't even use the Lightroom one, where it's you know, built onto the desktop. Everything I use is 100% in the cloud. So after I take a photo, I can literally import it onto my iPad, and it's uploading. And so by the time I get home, most of the photos are already there in the cloud, so I can, you know, begin to start editing too. So that's another way to make your workflow faster.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's usually what you're paying for with a lot of these subscription-based services. Not to divert too far away from the rest of the conversation, but this is, I think, one of those points that there's a lot of people actually having a conversation about this, is that, you know, you can go to something like Photoshop Elements as a way to get into it and have that
Sure.
kind of control. I would say that if you jump right into doing Photoshop Elements, you're probably going to progress to the next step and just get the full-blown Photoshop
Yep.
and Lightroom.
Sure.
And you still have to pay for that. And then you run into things where, with the subscription services, it's always updated. Now, the updates that come out, I think all of us can agree that not every update is the best. Some updates are a little more aggravating than others. But cameras are always updated and supported, new features are always rolled out, and that cloud access to all the content, because I'm the same way. If I'm using my phone to do edits, having
Yeah.
the Adobe Cloud and using Lightroom, or I don't even know what they call it. It's not Lightroom Classic anymore. It's just called Lightroom.
Yeah.
Because it seamlessly jumps from my phone to my computer, it shares all those settings. That can be a big thing. So, take a look at what your style is and figure out if actually going down that route is a good investment for you, because that's a way to look at it. It's an investment for your style and your work, not necessarily a penalty to buy software.
Yeah, and it doesn't need a hard drive space on my computer because it's all saved in the cloud. That's the big convenience, and it's automatically across all my devices. So, not
Exactly.
trying to plug Adobe, but not trying to plug Adobe because they did. Speaking of firmware updates or software updates that aren't great, they have this new one where it does like face retouching for you. There's some scary stuff that you can do with that. just if anyone gets a chance to look at those, don't use those. My recommendation. If you want to use them, that's to you. Some of that stuff's scary.
Oh, come on, using the one that can turn a totally stoic face,
Yeah.
super happy or super sad. Come on, those things are super fun to play around with.
Exactly.
So we're coming up. We got about 15 minutes left before the end of this session. There's one other image here that I just pulled up on the screen that I wanted to get your process for, because this is one of those more challenging, kind of shots that I think a lot of people always kind of are maybe too afraid of to go in and shoot when you have black on black.
Yes, black on black is usually requiring some kind of light in the background to have some kind of separation between the two people.
Yeah.
This was a shot that I didn't feel needed it because I thought the face and the surrounding elements were going to be such a statement that we were making. And Alexandria has such a symmetrical face that the fact that so this was with an umbrella. This was a 2-light setup. So this was a beauty dish and a 7-foot umbrella as a fill, which is why you still have some detail. She's not just a floating head on there. But this was in the butterfly light position, if I can see it right. Yeah, this is butterfly lighting, and this is going to give you that nice sunken in cheekbones and the nice definition on the face. And this is with the sock over it to give a nice diffusion, so it has that nice soft skin kind of porcelain look. This is like 70% out of camera is the way that this thing came. That I just need to do a couple retouching on the face, and everything else was just perfect. But this was a Maleficent costume that I saw online and for like $16 from like the Disney store on Amazon, and that's where I got the idea, because I thought like the feathers kind of framed everything nice, and I was like, let's pull back the hair really tight and just put some definition on the cheeks and get some contrast to the eyes for the makeup. So it all just came out really, really nice. But yeah, this typically would be a no-no, and what normal photographers would do. You have that black on black is too much, but I think it gives the right kind of punch for that kind of image.
Yeah. So kind of key for a lot of people out there is just because you may hear in presentations and from photographers out there that style A or style B is a no-no, doesn't mean you shouldn't still go down that path and try to make it work. I mean, obviously, you could go to create something like this and it could just totally come out wrong. I mean, that's part of the learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. I spend more time now taking less images and trying to just get the ones that I do take to be as right as possible, just because I don't want to throw away images, because you always want to. It's a waste of people's time. So you want to make sure when you are hitting that shutter, each one is going to be something that you'll either use, and you're mixing up the different type of positions and poses and things like that.
Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes left, give or take, and we've got basically a couple of other kind of questions that are maybe not necessarily directed to this session. So I want to make sure that we kind of address some of those at every time. And since basically everyone out there, you have 2 of the reps for Panasonic here, because again, Brandon does work for us. He covers, actually, I don't know, did we talk about that at the beginning? What areas you cover?
So I'm the Northeast Panasonic rep, so I go from Jersey to Maine. That is my territory.
There you go. So anybody that's out there, as we are slowly going back into local locations in an incredibly safe manner, there's no guarantee that we'll actually be there when you decide to go there, but that's the areas where you could actually see Brandon and learn from him there. So there, a couple of the other questions that had come through is actually, so when you're working with strobes off camera,
Okay.
what kind of synchronization do you use for those? Are you using, obviously we talked about Profoto Godox, but that was one of the questions that came up.
So in terms, I guess, the lighting themselves, so I try to keep it as simple as possible because every now and then you can get like flashes that'll have misfires and things like that. But I'm just simply doing, no more than 2 or 3 lights at maximum, and everything is just. I guess as a person asking the way I set the lights, where I'm going to be. I do each one of them individually. That's the way you would normally set lights. So you would address your normal light, then you go to your hair light, your key, or your background light, fill. You do each one of them one at a time, and then you combine them all together, and that's the way you're going to be synchronizing your lights together.
Yeah. And then what trigger systems do you use for actually triggering them off?
Oh, so the main one I'm going to be using is going to be the R2 Pro Mark II, which is the newest one that Godox came out with. This has the larger screen on it, and it has individual groups for the dials, which makes it super easy as opposed to the previous Pro that they were using, where everything was individual groups, and you had to press on the buttons. You didn't have actual hotkeys for A, B, or C groups. My old school one, which was my backup. This was the old school X1, which is like as low tech as it gets, but it still does work. But that is like a backup that I'll keep at home, and I bring the other two R2 Pros as my main lights that I'll use, to trigger everything.
Cool.
In terms of if anyone wants to know the lights that I'm using,
Yeah.
Almost everything is going to be the 600 Pro because that one has the most accurate colors that I'm finding without all the light systems. For my rear lights, I'll use either a 400 Pro, and if I do need to, even though they're not extremely color accurate, I'll use the 200 Pros, the 8200 Pros, but I use those almost rarely ever because most things are 1 to 2 light setups nowadays.
Well, good to know.
Yep.
Let's see here. Question from McDrew is, where do you like to curate a catalog that's not on Instagram? Do you use any other platforms for your portfolio?
Only on my website. That's pretty much where everything is, which is going to be brandoncortezphoto.com. But everything else is going to be on Instagram or every now and then, if you're on Facebook, I'm in the Jersey Shore Facebook groups that you see. I'll post images, on there that I don't put on Instagram because Instagram can censor work sometimes. Again, keeping us artists limited in what we want to show people. But
that is a personal statement, not a
Correct.
statement of the company.
Not endorsing. This is Brandon covering my Panasonic badge. But yeah, that's where I usually post stuff.
Cool. So for everyone that wants to follow the work and the photos that you do, I know you mentioned a couple locations there, your website and the some of the Facebook groups out there. Where can they find more photos, more examples for your work on like Instagram?
So my Instagram handle is brandmarz, MARZ, and that's where you'll pretty much find. I post usually like once or twice. Usually once a day if I have the time. If we're not working here, we're doing Panasonic stuff because it's getting very busy nowadays. But that's pretty much where I'll post all my work.
Awesome. Well, cool. I'm going. We've got a couple other questions in here, Brandon. If you check out the chat, looks like there's some people asking how much you charge for your portrait services as well.
Send me a DM.
Yeah.
Basically, the answer to that, it varies on what the work is. That's really the answer for it.
Yeah.
So it's something that's going to require, makeup, head, stuff like that, where I have to build a set. Sometimes I even build sets, or it takes like a month to get costume, things like that. It's more obviously than something that's basic outside. So
Yeah.
hit me up.
So let's see here. Do we have any other questions over in Photo Plus or any other questions over here in YouTube? I think we've done a pretty good job of getting to a lot of people's questions. Let's see. Keith was asking one that I apologize that I missed this. Keith, he was asking, how do you get the iris in focus, manual focus, or autofocus? I think we
Oh, so
covered that a little bit. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm going to be using autofocus. I'm an AFS on the Panasonic camera, and I'm going to be using face and eye detection, and I'm going to be shooting not at a low f-stop. I'm not going to be shooting wide open for that because you're just going to get eyelashes. So if you want to be at least 2 stops, more than what you normally would be. So I try f4 is usually like the easiest way if you're doing headshots for somebody, be at like 5.6 or f8. Just keep in mind that if you're shooting at that low, with that amount of aperture being a little small like that, you're going to need a fairly large and powerful light to fill in for that. So, but you will get extremely sharp images. That's the big thing.
Yeah. Well, cool. So let's basically, kind of round this up. We've got a whole bunch of additional streams going on the rest of this month. I want to thank you, Brandon, for jumping on with us today.
Thank you.
Anybody that has additional questions about your work, about portrait photography, feel free, everybody, and Brandon, I'm throwing you out on this one as well here. Feel free to jump over to the Photo Plus platform. Get yourself registered on there because you can be chatting with Brandon, myself, Jack, Michael, on different topics that are relevant to your style, questions that you have specifically. So that is one of the big benefits about what's going on with Photo Plus this year. The fact that we can't all come together in a single location like we've done for years and years and years means that we can be doing this remotely and virtually. I know we've held a couple of one-on-one sessions over there. I know the platform's definitely really, really fun for this. For those that don't know what Photo Plus is or where you can get it, we will drop a link to it in the YouTube channel, since everyone over on Photo Plus, you guys are obviously already there.
Let's hope.
Yeah. It's free to sign up. You get to learn from some of the best people in the industry. You get to have the conversations with reps from obviously different brands. You can be reaching out to, as I've said before, all of us here at Panasonic and set up one-on-one sessions. I've had a number of one-on-one sessions. I know that, Brandon, you've got a couple of them so far. It's a lot of fun. It's really, really awesome to stay interactive with all of us throughout the week. And there's always a chat open. Obviously, if you chat us at like 2 o'clock in the morning, located in the U.S., we might not get back to you right away.
Yeah, it might take a little bit.
And as I can see, it looks like Jack I think Jack's monitoring the chat today. The link is over in the YouTube channel, so go over, register, get yourself signed in. We simulcast these events over here on YouTube and over on Photo Plus at the same time. So, with that, I want to remind everybody that we have 2 more sessions that are going to coincide with Photo Plus this month. We have a session next week, Tuesday, from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Michael Richardson, where we're going to be covering sports photography. We're going to cover, similar to like what we talked about today, we'll check out some of Michael's images, we'll talk about the process he goes through, what's involved in sports photography if you want to get into that area. Obviously now's a little challenging, and we'll even talk about that. And then we're going to wrap the month up with Jack Salamanchuk. We're going to talk about light painting, macro photography, live composite, and answer, again, a ton of questions that you guys all have out in the community. So, once again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time and joining us today for this week's Lumix Live session. If you're joining us over on YouTube, remember to hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get more notifications. We will be returning back to our Thursday normal schedule in December, but just remember Tuesdays at 3:30 Eastern Time here. With that, again, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next Tuesday. Thanks for watching, everybody.